Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our seminar for tonight. I'm Astrid. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow here at the Global Center on Healthcare and Urbanization at Kellogg College, and I'll be chairing tonight's seminar. Thank you all for joining us on this very warm summer evening. I know we're competing with the sun, so I really appreciate you all being here. So this event is part of the GCHU public seminar series, which brings together people from across disciplines and sectors to explore the intersection of sustainable urban development and health and well-being. It's really designed to spark ideas, to challenge assumptions, and to foster dialogue across these sectors and boundaries. So this evening, we're turning our attention to a question that's as urgent as it is complex. So when we design the future of our cities, how can communities prosper under net zero? And at first glance, net zero might sound like a neutral technical goal, all about emissions, infrastructure, and future targets. But if we look closer, net zero is not just a policy ambition, it's a political and social project, and it's a deeply contested term. So while it signals urgency and ambition, it also raises difficult questions of who sets the targets, who defines the pathways, and who gets a say in what the future looks like. Some critics have pointed out that the current net zero agenda risks becoming a technocratic fix, a race to decarbonize that fails to tackle the social inequalities and ecological degradation already shaping people's daily lives. So that's why tonight's conversation centers on a broader, more integrated view, because if we want urban futures that are not just low carbon, but truly livable, we have to ask, how do we meet everyone's needs of food, housing, care, mobility, and dignity while staying within our planet's ecological boundaries? So in other words, how do we redefine prosperity? And you'll hear tonight about frameworks that are trying to do just that. Approaches like Doughnut Economics, which rethinks the economy not just as a market machine, but as something embedded in society and ecological systems. And you also hear reflections on how these ideas are being taken up and challenged in real places. And in fact, Oxfordshire presents a particularly interesting case. It's a county rich in academic knowledge, climate innovation, and green tech, and yet it breaches environmental thresholds while still falling short of many social needs. So the question becomes, what would it take to shift our local economy into a safe and just space for all? So these questions are obviously far from theoretical. They touch on the real work of designing policy, of shaping infrastructure, and strengthening community voices. They demand that we rethink not just how to cut carbon, but how to build futures that are fair, sustainable, and inclusive. So this evening is a chance to do just that, to listen, to learn, and to challenge. And we have a wonderfully diverse audience here tonight, and also joined by 4 brilliant speakers who will bring insight, experience, and provocation to these questions. So let me briefly introduce you to our speakers. On our left here, we have Joanne Mansell-Pledel, founder of Make It Good and member of the Oxfordshire Doughnut Project, who brings a place-based lens to sustainable development. Next up, we have Dr. Amy Burnett, research fellow at Middlesex University and with the Center for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity, whose work spans alternative economies and regenerative systems. Next up, we have Amy Kaur, co-founder of Civic Square and a driving force behind community-led civic infrastructure. And last but not least, we have Emily Green from Oxford City Council, from the Environmental Sustainability Team, who'll speak to the realities of implementing change from within local government. So each speaker will offer a short reflection of 5 minutes, followed by time for discussion and questions from all of you. So without further ado, let's begin with the first speaker, Joanne. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Great. great privilege to be here. Has anyone heard of Tim Minchin's 3-minute song? It's going to be a bit like that, but less fun and no music, because I'm going to have to speak really fast to get through what I've got to say here. I'm going to start with a bit of a provocation, and that is that Doughnut Economics isn't a framework, it's a way of thinking. And this is what we really need to prosper in our communities. So the tools of Doughnut Economics drive mindset shift. I'm going to whip through a few of these. Oop. There we go. The tools drive mindset shift in application. So it's when communities work with those tools, their mindsets shift and they change the way that they think. And this is at the heart of how we can prosper as we go forward. And effectively, these are hugely powerful communication tools. The Doughnut gives us a new goal to aim for that's beyond growth and points us toward thriving. The portrait of place tells us where we are and is a really powerful engagement tool to really show us some truth, show us the truth where it's hidden. And we build the portrait of place by unrolling the donut to reveal the four lenses. And it's these key perspectives that are fundamentally important to genuinely getting to a net zero future that is inclusive and where people can thrive. And it asks these three key questions, which I'm not going to read, I'm going to let you read, and I'm going to whip through this next slide and shortly, and just couch this in this, because this is a really key, one of the key ways to think like a 21st century economist that Kate Raworth put forward, and that is to think of our economy as in service to society and earth systems, and that's not what's happening at the moment. But with the right tools, we change our thinking and apply that to projects in the communities, we can build something better. So Astrid alluded to the great riches of Oxfordshire. Someone last week at Oxfordshire Green Tech referred to Oxfordshire as having an embarrassment of riches. The academia, the green tech innovation, it's a social enterprise network, it's beautiful, areas of outstanding natural beauty, all the things. And yet, this is our selfie. We are breaching planetary boundaries all over the place, and we're not meeting people's basic needs across the social foundation. This picture builds both the local and the ecological. Some of you probably quite familiar with the local lenses. So in the interest of bringing new perspective to what's happening in Oxfordshire, I'm just going to flip straight through to the global ecological headlines, because this represents an untold story in this county. At the moment, we are exceeding the climate change boundary by 700%. At the current rate, because we're including consumption-based emissions, which currently government doesn't, we are due to hit our boundary, the carbon budget for 2050 for Oxfordshire by April 2026. If we look at our consumption, also through the roof, but across both measures, what you see are massive differences in wealth, right? So the wealthy, higher income quartiles are blowing those budgets in a far greater sense than the smaller, lower income quartiles who are existing much closer to the planetary boundaries. So that's a pretty terrifying picture on the global ecological. And if we switch to the global social lens, that also tells a similar picture. Right, we depend on the global south for 67% of our imports. We have really high exposure to supply chains with poor human rights. And what this story tells us is that the standard of living in Oxfordshire depends on the standard of living in other places being lower than ours. To maintain our Oxfordshire standard of living, we rely on countries grappling with poverty, deep inequality, and where political voice, peace and justice are compromised. If we do not consider those dimensions in as we move toward net zero, we will get to net zero and we will still have left people behind, not only locally, but also globally. But what can we do about it? This is pretty dismal, isn't it? Right, so there are communities and places all over the world, leadership municipalities at a city level, at a county level, and also at a hyper-local level who are using Doughnut tools to shift their perspective, change mindsets as powerful communication tools to bring people along in the same way. So if we look at Amsterdam, for example, Amsterdam looked at their global and their global impact, global social impacts, and they looked at their global ecological impact, and they used that to drive their circularity strategy. And when they looked at their circularity strategy, they identified 3 key sectors: food, the built environment, and consumer goods, and they built their circularity strategy around that. We could totally do that here if we are looking at if we're taking the big picture and we're seeing the challenges for what they are. In Melbourne, I've got a bit of a soft spot for what happens in Melbourne. In Melbourne, they took 3 years of really powerful community engagement to ask people what they wanted in their communities. And in their communities, they spoke to policymakers, they spoke to, everyday people on the ground, community groups. They looked at what was working, what wasn't working, and they came up with earth shots, radically ambitious for collaborative projects that involved everybody across the embedded economy. Let's go for a swimmable Birrawong. Wouldn't that be great in Oxfordshire, where currently all rivers are unsafe for humans to swim in at the moment and completely biologically depleted? They also have got an earth shot for livable streets and an earth shot for 15-minute cornucopias, which is good, sustainable food. Okay, all right, so that's inspiration from elsewhere, but where does that leave us in terms of what's possible here? Okay, so can our communities prosper under net zero? Yes, but we need a shared vision of prosperity. And yes, we need to activate our collective capacity across this embedded economy, working in relationship. We need to involve citizens and consumers. They need to be active participants and leaders. We need our government, our local government, to be enablers. And to county council's credit, I think that is happening in so many different places, and I feel really inspired by their work. And we need markets and organisation mechanisms that redistribute and support and facilitate work that strives toward net zero and is inclusive. Within all that, we need to see the big picture and embrace uncomfortable truths, because by doing that, we can develop strategies that are genuinely regenerative and genuinely redistributive by design.
Thanks very much. Next up, we have Amy. The floor is yours.
Right. So, thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. I wanted just to kind of strip it back a little bit and read you a poem that I wrote because I am an academic, but I've also been writing poems since I was 9, and whenever I feel like I need to kind of articulate something deep within, I write a poem or I write a song, and so I thought it'd be a different way of communicating things to you, and it'd be interesting to see how it lands. But also, I just wanted to very, very briefly, because Imi's also going to talk about this, is unpack the title. There's a lot of loaded words in there, and maybe this is in the kind of idea of stripping back and simplifying. But maybe by including all these terms, it's actually making it too complex to kind of understand and communicate from all these different multiple lenses. So I think it's really important to actually just start with storytelling as a means to communicate from our heart, like what kind of world we want to live in. And so this is my poem, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it relates to some of the work that I have also worked on. So this is a poem about regenerative systems, which I basically took a page out of my gratitude journal, wrote down a few notes, and then turned it into a poem. So regenerative systems are mindful and compassionate. They are respectful and authentic. They know and love your difference through genuine dialogue. They seek compassion and enable you in thriving places by holding a safe space in which to evolve healthy relationships. They are reciprocal, rewarding, and inspiring. They lead you to outcomes that are good for you and those around you and the natural systems upon which you depend. They support your higher purpose and the dreams that were meant to come true. They think before they consume, they mend and make do. They are playful and want you to create with them. And so that's, the vision that I want to kind of leave just a small little drop in the ocean of the world that we all inhabit together. And I just think it's an interesting methodology to think about the role of storytelling, poems, music, whatever it might be. And, what's your poem of societal change and prosperity? Maybe if you've never written a poem before, it's something that you can just take out a pen and connect with yourself and connect with the world that you want to create. And also maybe ask the person next to you to compare notes on how your poem is similar or different to yours. And use this as like a stepping stone, kind of like, a personal milestone project or an organizational project to kind of think, what can you do to facilitate each of the steps within your kind of grand vision? So I think that it's, highly important to kind of think about Doughnut Economics. And I've written about stuff called regenerative value, which I'll quickly tell you about. And that is the idea that what we need in terms of like incentivizing the right kind of behavior is the governance and the resourcing to continually encourage positive change and positive transitions. And that's also in ourselves, because I just wanted to turn it on its head a little bit to kind of think about prosperity through a lens of disadvantage. Because sometimes, we may look outwardly like we have things, we may inwardly feel like we don't, but actually we do compared to other people. And I think disadvantage is a kind of temporal state. Sometimes you have things, sometimes you don't. And it's through that kind of, that's very relatable to Doughnut Economics, because sometimes the things are offshooting planetary boundaries, sometimes they're within. But I think so long as you have like principles that you're prepared to live by, whether that's like, measuring regeneratively, thinking regeneratively, incentivizing regeneratively, and continually encouraging the best in yourself and those around you, and thinking about, are you actually being honest with yourself and authentic in terms of, you might believe in degrowth, but how much do you kind of shop on Amazon and those kind of things? So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. I am notoriously known as a Guardian long read, so there's literally no way to make this 5 minutes work well for me. So I thought, right, let me just choose one bit that I can unpack and say that if you want to talk more about Civic Square, the work we do, what's on this title, I've shared loads of links and I brought loads of things with me. Because ultimately I think that there's a lot of space in society for hot takes. I can give you a hot take, I'm about to give you a hot take, underpinned by a lot of work. But actually what this work needs is an incredible amount of warm nuance. There is so much that we have to trade off and understand and unpack in order to understand what it means as whilst it might not feel like it, as a rich Western nation to get back in the donut when we're hugely overshooting, and we have historically. That isn't going to be like through one strategy or one idea or one leverage point or community groups alone or local government alone. It is going to be through many, many different things. And so I've brought loads with me to share more on that. But I wanted to just pick into one layer to give you like a provocation. And it really is a spicy provocation to help us move the conversation on. So in our publication, 3 Degree Neighbourhood, which underpins much of the work we're doing, to give you a quick glance forward, we are a deeply embedded neighbourhood organisation that has been working in our city as young people for the last 15 years and have been really focused on what it means for communities and the neighbourhoods that they live in being at the forefront of the climate, social, ecological transition that we face. But in order to really understand what we're talking about, we need to be honest, as mentioned. Being honest isn't a way to scare us. It is a way to hold us to responsibility. It is a way to build foundations. In an institution like this, it is in order to build a thesis that actually is commensurate with the challenge, not just the thesis that we feel comfortable with within our own worldviews and logics. That's why we pursue this idea of honesty. We also did a vast amount of work with Doughnut Economics, which we've bought I bought the publication so you can look into that with our communities in the urban inner city in Birmingham. But this piece of research just gives us, like I said, a little bit of food for thought. Currently, we, at time of writing, this was 12 months ago, we were at 1.3 degree temperature increase. This means that we have already created over the last 50 to 100 years, and arguably the last 400 to 500 years in our recent history, unimaginable destruction and harm, and many communities across the world have deeply experienced the impact of a warming planet. We in the UK are now starting to really understand what that looks like, and will continue to for the next, let's see how long, but for at least the next 3 decades. And so this threshold that we've created of 1.5 degrees is an arbitrary number we've created and decided that we're going to work towards. But already within those targets within the UK, we are already on track to hit 3 degrees by 2050, maybe earlier than 2050. So someone born today will already experience that and all the impacts, even if we hit 1.5. And just to be clear, 1.5 is kind of an arbitrary number. It already has catastrophic impact on our own supply chains and many of the things that we're already doing. And in practical ways, for example, if you're in the built environment, you'll know this on material costs. If you're in the farming world, you'll already know this on food supply chains. If you work anywhere with people who are experiencing poverty, you will see this within overheating homes, overcrowded homes, people not being able to live within the basic means of what is a dignified life. And so why net zero? Well, because absolutely no communities can't thrive under net zero. Fundamentally, no. There's no way, two ways about that. Because what is net zero currently? Net zero by 2050 takes us to just under 1.5 degrees, which we're nowhere near on track of, but that means catastrophic impacts to the global south and substantial impacts in the global north. But we're not even on track there. Our current pledges see us shooting past 2 degrees and 2.5 degrees by 2050. And our current policies, according to those pledges for net zero, see us get much closer to 3 degrees. So this is not a moral argument. This is not anything else. No, we can't, because our policies and pledges currently don't match up to what we've said, and we're already not going to hit justice for communities all across the global south and haven't. So no, I don't think that's possible. And I think that this focus on net zero is incredibly troubling. And I'm using Kate Raworth's own words in Rational Economic Man. If you've read the book, please read it. It's a caricature of our current extractive economy. Net zero is the rational economic man of these times. We need a fundamental rethink about beyond carbon tunnel vision, and there's many ways to be able to do that. So in a city like Birmingham, this is what it looks like in practice, and in an urban inner city where you are experiencing many, many different things simultaneously, it means that we see a piling on of many risks. You speak to most people in our neighbourhood and they've experienced one or part of these already. These are not abstract risks in the future. These are just the top 6 that we came up with in the research that we did using IPCC and UKCCC work. And it isn't maybe any one of these that we don't know what the future looks like if we design for them. It's the fact that they're compounding and they're on top of each other, and there are tipping points and many other layers that we need to be able to think about. So by 2030, Birmingham summers will exceed 40 degrees. This is just one little snippet of the challenges we will face. And so currently, what's our strategy if we say net zero is the way forward? We've decided on policies and pledges that aren't enough already, but we've decided in order to do this, we are going to have to extract a level of resources, materials and minerals from the global south to meet our own net zero targets, which will look like taking from the countries that historically have contributed the least to this challenge. And then, in order to keep that energy transition alive, look at the scale of change we're going to need in our mineral demand. That's it today. That's what we'll need by 2050. So we'll need a 600% increase in our mineral and resource demand in this country alone to meet net zero, which currently isn't enough to keep us within livable limits and involves us enacting a new age of extraction and imperialism to see that. So no, I don't think it's going to be possible for global south communities or communities here to thrive under net zero. However, if we start asking better questions beyond carbon tunnel vision, if we ask what it means for our communities to be at the forefront of a whole-scale transition that we have seen before at the end of the industrial era, that we have seen before at the end of the war, and we start to build infrastructure and mobilisation to put people at the forefront of their climate, social and ecological transitions, and we're able to leave behind some of the 20th century memes of what our economy is in service of. There's a whole future that is viable, thriving, prosperous and incredible, and that's what we're trying to build in Birmingham at Civic Square, a real world demonstrator of what that looks like when people are at the forefront of transforming their homes and streets and neighbourhoods in just and regenerative ways. Thank you.
Thank you. That's hard to follow. I was going to go a little bit more positive. Yes, so I work for the City Council. So this is a local government perspective. So yes, I do think communities can prosper under net zero. And of course, they're crucial to achieving it. And I think we all agree, and what you've heard from other speakers, whilst the term net zero is technically about reducing carbon, it's really vital that the co-benefits of achieving net zero are given the appropriate attention. So net zero to us means reducing our carbon emissions and supporting our natural environment in a way that overtly realises the improvements to our physical and mental health, well-being, air quality, water quality, land quality, biodiversity, transport, employment opportunities, wealth equality, and ultimately our happiness. And we need to work together with our communities to ensure that this is what net zero means to people, and that probably means calling it something else. So the environmental sustainability team at the City Council are working on all of the things that I just listed. We're busy. And we're working to two targets, net zero by 2030 for our own City Council estate and operations, and 2040 for the wider city. Well, this isn't easy. Our corporate strategy has 5 priorities, all of equal importance. That means that we often have direct conflict between, for example, our affordable homes priority and our zero carbon Oxford priority. So the additional costs for developers to build net zero carbon homes reduces the proportion of affordable homes that they can deliver. And that's the current economic reality of the situation, because the co-benefits don't get factored in. And we're really heavily dependent on grant funding. But the Council acknowledges these challenges, and we actually held a citizens' assembly on climate change to discuss just that. So we're approaching it head on. And we revisit our priorities each year to ensure that they continue to meet the needs of the people that we serve in Oxford. But we don't yet have all those solutions, but these are emerging through the work that people in here are doing, and through the transition itself and the innovation that is bringing. So engaging communities in this transition is about communicating effectively and understanding motivation. At the City Council, our engagement activities show that carbon is not a motivating factor for action, and engaging communities in climate action is really, really hard, especially in the more deprived areas. So we need to communicate that wider vision of what net zero means in Oxford and tailor it to those different communities. And we need to figure out which of those co-benefits resonate with particular communities and bring everybody together. So we've got some projects we've been delivering, such as a house-like mine project on energy efficiency and 12 different common house archetypes across Oxford, and our community uptake of air source heat pump projects, Clean Heat Streets, which do this quite well. But our low-income and vulnerable residents are disproportionately affected by climate change and the effects of poor quality housing and poor air quality in particular. In Oxford, there is a direct correlation between areas of deprivation and low tree canopy cover. 11% of the population of Oxford is in fuel poverty. Life expectancy at birth for men in the most deprived areas is 13 years shorter for men. This is just a few miles away from each other. 9 years for women than in the least deprived areas. And housing in low-income areas is much less well insulated, leading to higher bills and negative impacts on health from damp and mould. But the low-income and vulnerable stand to significantly benefit, provided we manage this transition appropriately. But no mean feat. Of the 61,500 homes in Oxford, 37,000 of them have an energy performance rating of D or lower, meaning that they will need some kind of retrofit to improve their energy efficiency. The financial and health benefits of retrofit are far more likely to be motivating factors than carbon reduction, and our engagement is seeking to make that happen. And so air pollution particularly affects the most vulnerable in society, and low-income communities are also disproportionately affected. We also have, like I mentioned, a correlation between low tree canopy cover and deprivation, making summer overheating for less resilient communities a significant climate change risk. The good news is that we are working really hard on this, and we have had some really great achievements. For example, nitrogen dioxide levels are reduced in the city by 50%. As a result, that's in the last decade, and most of that in the last 2 years as a result of our air quality action plan and schemes such as the fleet of 159 brand new electric buses, equivalent of 69% of the total bus mileage of the city. We also have one of the highest uptakes of electric vehicles in the UK, with 1 in 5 predicted to be electric by 2030, which further contributes to the reduction of nitrogen dioxide in the city. We've also seen a 40% reduction in PM 2.5. And to put that into context, the Public Health Outcomes Framework estimated that in Oxford in 2023, 5.2% of all deaths in over 30s were directly attributable to PM 2.5 pollution. So improving the air quality and the work that we're doing on that is directly saving lives. So as a local authority, how do we do this? How do we engage our communities in this? Well, we need to make our language and actions inclusive. We need to lead by example. We need to show communities the benefits. We need to show everyone how to take action and involve businesses, organisations, institutions and communities in that journey. And we need to work together to do that using 5 engagement principles. Make it the norm, everyone's doing it. Build trust, sell the vision, focus on the first step. Make taking that first step as easy as possible. And finally, walk alongside people on the journey.
Thank you all very much for very inspiring and provocative statements. I think it gave us a lot of food for thought for the discussion that we're now turning to. And if you have a question or a comment or a statement, I would invite you to introduce yourself briefly and then ask your question briefly so we can get through as many questions as possible. And yes, we have a roving mic in the back. So anyone has any questions for our speakers, individually or collectively? I know there's a lot of discussion going on whether or not communities can prosper under net zero, and I'm glad that this sort of concept sparked a debate between you. So I'm interested to hear from our audience what you think about this term and whether or not you have questions for our speakers.
Hello everyone, my name's Mike. I'm from the Deep South. So bugger off. We want to keep our resources and eat our donuts. Thank you very much. I'm wondering whether the question that we're looking at is a valid question. If we're pushing up the temperatures to 3 degrees, then might not the question be, how can we design urban futures where people can prosper under 3 degrees? And why are we continuing to argue about net zero? I'll leave that open to the panel.
I'm happy to kick off. At the heart of our work is asking better questions, right? And so one part of I only did the provocation part. If I had another 15 minutes, I'd tell you all about the work and all of these sorts of things, which is much more positive and much more hopeful. But yeah, like a big question for us is that regardless, and to be really clear, I think parts of carbon reduction and many, many other things that I've said in the Beyond Carbon Tunnel vision do help us to start to see these sorts of transformations and will help us over the arc of maybe the next 50 to 150 years, rebuild our world at many scales, in the most hopeful and positive view of that. But regardless of that, we are on track for a range of things that are going to hit in our lifetimes and our children's lifetimes. So I do agree with this question of how do we ask better questions. I'm not convinced from what I can see at 3 degrees that we're talking about prospering. I think we're talking about something quite catastrophic. However, and we could point to other parts of the world where resource wars, genocide, land settlement, and many other things are starting to happen in the pursuit of material extraction and resource extraction. But this question of how do we adapt to what is coming, how do we build climate resilience, is as valid and important as the one about mitigation, as the one about carbon. And our take is that we don't necessarily have time to do these things one by one. So if you look at the national retrofit strategy, we need to retrofit. When we did the research on it 3 years ago, it was like 1 home every 3 seconds. We're nowhere near that, just to be really clear. We're doing it in piecemeal ways. We're having mixed, at the national level, we're having mixed uptake. Very little of it is building community and local wealth. A lot of it is re-bringing wealth back to the dominant economy and many of the large energy companies. But this idea that first we would retrofit all the homes and then we'll think about something else and then we'll think about something else already takes us into like 100 years from now. So the idea really is that how do we ask better questions and layer better work? And I think in British history, even though I'm here as a product of literal the colonisation of India, in British history we have made transitions of this scale before, and we have layered multiple questions at the same time and moved things on in 20 or 30 years, which I don't have time to talk about. But if you ever want to talk about that, I think it's totally possible. So I agree with you. I don't think it is dissenting to say let's just ask better questions, because in an institution like this, I'm assuming whole theses are built, whole ways of leading this country are built from the questions and the research that we're basing our ideas on. So let's stack them up and ask better ones for sure.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I would also say, I mean, ultimately we're talking about, your question is climate mitigation versus climate adaptation. And local authorities have had climate change strategies for years, but climate adaptation strategies are relatively new. And the Oxfordshire County Council, with the tier above, are leading on that in the county, and with some really good joint work. Imi was mentioning the national retrofit strategy, and one of the things I find quite interesting about that is retrofit has been very focused on keeping people warm, but actually that strategy needs to talk also about putting shutters on people's houses for overheating events, planting trees in areas to shade houses, this kind of thing, and I don't think we're there yet, pushing for it.
I think it's really important that we check in about what does it mean to kind of feel prosperous, and I think that there is a very complex relationship between value, growth, resilience and satisfaction, and how we can know when enough is enough, like when we consume things as well. And so I think there's just that general kind of soul searching, if you like, on those questions. But also, if you look at what happened in COVID, that was a crisis, and look how much people came to support each other. And I know that when climate comes into play, that's going to be a whole kettle of fish. But it's not that, even if we did reach 3 degrees, humans are naturally supportive people. And while we may have conflict and antagonism, etc., in places, I think that there may be ways to innovate no matter what circumstances we have. And it's up to us to be mindful of how we can encourage in our everyday practices just that little bit of hope, whether it's 3 degrees or -3 degrees.
Agree with everything, and I just wanted to reflect on the net zero point. If the idea of decarbonising to a point of zero is obviously a really great idea, and whether net zero itself is a good idea, that's going to happen, and communities are still going to do that and progress with that. But this was an idea that was very noble in its beginnings. It emerged out of Oxford University. It was at the cornerstone of the IPCC report in 2000 and which one? I don't know, 18, 19, one of those. And then what's happened to net zero is that really good idea became co-opted by, effectively, the markets. And then what's happened is that carbon has been commoditised. That's the same thing that's happened to nature recovery. And so we need to ladder back to this other point, which is this is what a capitalist growth agenda does. That sounds really kind of left-wing and very provocative, but let's just take a systems view. This is what capitalism does to really good ideas. And so this is why we need to abandon growth-led economics, focus on thriving, and at this stage in the game, adaptation has got to be at the absolute heart of it.
We have a question in the back. Yeah, Dominic.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to honest communication. So most of you were talking about the Doughnut framework as a point of orientation, and I wonder how you do use this framework to align your local activities to what is needed on a global scale. Because so from what I read in the research is that to stay within the safe and just boundary framework, we would like really not just defossilize our energy systems. That would be only like a minor step of what we need to do. We need to really curb on any kind of consumption that goes beyond what is basic needs. So there is not much more than hygiene, nutrition and stuff that is left if we take that seriously. And so for me, it's not that I don't see that happening. I don't see that anyone is trying to make that happen or just saying that this should happen. So I think we are really very far away from taking this challenge seriously, and even in the most donuts that are applied locally, I mean, I like the numbers that showed how far this district is away. But I don't see that is really taken seriously and sold to the general public as our vision for the future. And I wonder what you think about that.
I just want to come on, net zero, nature positive. They are, Doughnut Economics, regenerative value, whatever. They are terms, but they are also, they frame certain things. And I've just finished working on a nature positive accelerator as part of a project that we're working on at Middlesex with others, which is all about how to integrate nature principles into financial markets. And as part of that, we supported a cohort of early stage, i.e. startup companies that really wanted to use nature value as something to kind of give back to nature through their products, services, technologies, whatever. And I think there's some incredibly exciting new business opportunities that are out there that financiers want to invest in. And I think there are a lot of financiers out there. I think capitalism comes in many, many different shades, and we are, calling everything about capitalism wrong is just vilifying. I'm not saying that there aren't problems with capitalism, and I'm not advocating that we live in a totally capitalist world, but everybody is buying into it to some extent. You can live off grid, or you can, choose to kind of separate yourself from the world. But as I said, lots of people can make a conscious decision to create something regeneratively, whether it's starting a business or, as I said, reflecting regeneratively, etc. So I just think that the land is also, it's possible to kind of give back if you treat it properly as well, and also social systems. So although, it might seem that capitalism inherently problematic, which, you could argue it is, there are solutions out there that are trying to bridge that gap.
Thank you for the question. So just a few different things, just to pick up from that, because This is one of the reasons why I think it's incredibly important to be specific about what we mean. So it's cool if net zero means everything that you're talking about, which basically means you're rewriting net zero. But at a national scale, that's not what we mean by net zero. So equally, I think for us, we've done a lot of that unpacking of the economic ideas, and this idea that capitalism is inherently bad is definitely one to give a lot of attention to. If you look on Kate Raworth's videos, she does the black box of capitalism, and people open up and they really expand and talk about what they mean. Fundamentally, I would not say the idea of capitalism is inherently bad. Extractive capitalism that commodifies all the things that are critical to human life and the planet thriving is self-terminating. So we're really, really specific on terms for this reason, hence why I gave the provocation I did, because I was like, when you're saying something and when you're building something, being specific in an institution like this, being specific is the difference between whether we end up with a national strategy that is being hijacked by the commodification of the same economic system, leading us into 3 degrees, or whether we get something else. So I think these questions are really, really important. If I did the second half of my talk would be a lot longer than this, and it would talk about 3 key concepts. One is where we are seeing this deep systems transformation and systems demonstration in real time, and we are. There are funders and incredible work that are building real world practice in neighbourhoods in the UK that acknowledges where we're at, and you're right, a lot of it would have to very much rethink incredibly material heavy retrofits. It would ease overcrowding, it would do loads more with what we already have, it would focus on indigenous low-tech approaches to heating and cooling, it would stack functions, it would encourage more intergenerational living, it would encourage more shared infrastructure at street scale, so we don't all need washing machines, we don't all need all of these things, yes. Now, the bit after that, so I tell you this really hopeful thing, and then I tell you the bit after that, which is every single time we got something as the scale of the NHS or the libraries. Now, let's be clear, obviously, the last 100 years of our economy have pretty much got us to the point where we've degraded the fundamentals of the things that we did build off the back of our colonial wealth, which was really high quality infrastructure and institutions. Those things came at these massive fracture points. The future of those systems came from organising in places. So Tredegar Medical Aid Society has the roots of the NHS in it. 40 years before the war brought this, we need the entire country to be healthier, to transition back into work and all of that. And there's a similar story with the community libraries, and there's many others. So the final point I want to bring to that whole arc is that, of course, what I've just talked about is not the norm. We are in growth, growth, growth. And if you come to a city like Birmingham, we are going at our material footprint at a rate of knots. We are putting up like the worst quality buildings that are going to need to be retrofitted, and homes that are going to need to be retrofitted before they're even finished. By the time they're finished, they'll need a plan on them. And so I think this really important layer here is that actually, I don't know what the tipping point is going to be. I don't know if it's going to be like the industrial system or the transatlantic slave trade not being profitable anymore, meaning we need to build a whole different world. I don't know if it's going to be an incredibly sick country that can't go back to work post the war that will build a transformation. But with all of the research and the knowledge that we have, we know we're right at the end of an economic system and the beginning of new social and technological ideas as well as crisis. And as Kate would say, you know, we're in Kate's home city, you know, you have to have ideas ready on the table to mobilise. And what a lot of those demonstrators are working on is actually making those ideas tangible, at scale, involving many people, and there's loads of them, and I'm really happy to talk about that. But is it the dominant story? No, and I fully agree, but does it have to be the dominant story for the edge to move back into the middle of what's needed? Yeah, over and over again in history we've seen that. And economic ideas are not forever. They do not last forever. neoliberalism has a whole story. Read about how it was conceived and how it was funded and what happened, and you will realise it was a project that was people-made, man-made. Man-made ideas can be dismantled and rebuilt, and ultimately it's either whether we think we've got what it takes to step up in our generation to rebuild the next world, or whether we're kind of a little bit like neoliberalism that was born in that mountain about 80 years ago is the only way forward. And that isn't a big lefty view, that is just things, economics have to change, and they change, technology changes, transitions happen, and we need to be able to actually step in and understand that human-made systems always need to be made and remade, and we find ourselves in probably some of the worst versions of those human systems, right? But they're not death sentences, they're not just something we inherit and have to continue. We as people build them and change them. And like some of you who are older will know things that were not in the public psyche. You'll remember sitting in a restaurant where everybody was smoking. You remember sitting in places where you did more things together, or you shared more. You'll remember a time before single-use plastic. You'll remember loads and loads of large-scale and small-scale transitions. And so we also have to really, really dig deep to remember that some of this is like ours to rebuild. Whilst it might not feel like it, we are by far the most prosperous and privileged people in the world with the most amount of resources to be able to do something meaningful, and we have to use that privilege with incredible responsibility. And I talk about that as a system privilege, not if you're having a bad time at home, not if you've got individual things, not even like, I'm both a product of colonisation and I benefit from the systems here now. I have a responsibility to it. So I just think some of this is also about how we understand what is and isn't as to change, and a lot is, right? A lot really is. And kind of a generational responsibility as well.
I mean, you sort of touched upon it, what I was going to ask really, but maybe just to put it another way. So I'm Keith Watson, I'm doing the Masters in Sustainable Urban Development here, but I'm also father of 2 daughters. At school, at primary school certainly, climate change is taught about in a certain way. I think the move to sort of secondary school, it seems to sort of drop out the curriculum a bit, but just picking up maybe what you're just discussing there about next generations, how can you engage the youngest people but still providing some degree of optimism but dealing, looking to the future and adapt? How might we do that?
I'll take that if I may, and it links to the question that the chap asked earlier about the fact that we are so far out of the donut, and there's a massive truth gap between where we are and current reality and what's happening on the ground. And just reflecting back what Innie said, that there are actually amazing stories happening around the world in communities, but it is pretty much being led by communities, right? And those stories are really important to show us what's possible. And in those stories, what you see is people massively reducing their reliance on resources. It's people at the heart of it. I think there's a lot of properly connecting with oneself and going through your own mindset shift on what's important, connecting with nature. So how one lives is really important, and just bringing it back to the kids. I've got 2 daughters as well. They're older, they're 12 and 14. I'm also was the governor of a primary school where the head teacher is embedding this very thing into the curriculum. And no one scares the children on climate facts. They're primary school kids, right? So what the strategy, so I kind of might have lobbed a donut suggestion to the board, and now Thriving is part of the school vision. And what they do is they connect kids with nature and the outdoors. They've started growing their own food. They've installed kitchens into the classrooms. They get the children involved in nature recovery projects and nature. They do nature counts. They've got a pond. They integrate with other. So it's like living it. And I think there's so much you can do around that across food, across clothing, materials, car, active travel. I mean, these are all the things. It's embody the lifestyle and embed it in their psyches over what's important and precious. I think that's a really important start. And then for those looking for inspiring stories, you have to go out and find them. Follow Antidote Studio on LinkedIn and Instagram. They're pulling some really great stories together about how communities are taking things into their own hands with community-owned energy, with community-owned infrastructure projects, community-led housing. All this stuff is fundamentally got adaptation at its heart. And there's another thing I just wanted to leave you with, which is that there's a Tasmanian environmentalist called Paul Gilding, I think. Paul Gilding, that's something like that. And he has been fighting this fight for a very long time, and his theory is a bit aligned with the two-loop theory of change, scream, crash, boom. And he says, first of all, you've got the scream phase, where all the scientists are screeching at the politicians to do something. Boom represents effectively systems collapse. And then the boom is crash is the systems collapse. And then the boom is effectively when communities start to emerge. And he says he's beyond optimistic now. He's kind of accepted that the system is going to fail. It's going to get really bad before it gets better. But with ultimate optimism, as Imi said, in the faith in humanity, human beings' ability to respond in times of crisis. But we can't respond until we crash. And so I've kind of got to that point myself. Over quite a deep period of grief. The Doughnut work has completely changed my mindset to the extent that I've abandoned working with businesses on corporate transition strategies and have shifted to work in my local community, and I'm now working with Oxfordshire Livable Streets and seeing how I can work in relationship with councillors, communities and individuals and see what we can do. And that's all you can do, really, isn't it?
I just wanted to make the point about how much of, not everything, but a lot of the things that you mentioned, like community energy, community housing, so much of that was enabled through central government policy, and they had a whole localism agenda. They had funding and programs. They had a huge amount of civil servants and ministers and stuff who kind of put together policy that got supported and it's enabled a lot of the community action. And I'm not saying that government facilitates everything, but I think we cannot forget the role that central government plays. And although there are funding constraints at the moment, there are still policies out there that are trying to support communities from a kind of genuine interest in place-based approaches. And I know that because I'm a policy innovation fellow working at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and there's just so much positive thinking going on. Likewise with MHCLG as well. So I think that we just can't forget that when we focus on the community. And the other thing that for instance, I've got background in planning, and I went to my children's school, and I was trying to encourage them to think about what does it mean in child-friendly terms to kind of think strategically about placemaking. Or I came across an article yesterday which is all about place keeping. So it's not all about making place, it's actually just keeping and retaining some of what already exists. But how to get into the mindset that children can actually have an influence and understand the systems that are in front of them that they may encounter as an adult, but to know about them now so that they can start to think, how do they relate to them and how do their actions and their thinking. And also watch what your kids watch on a screen, because do you just want them to consume really bright coloured loud shouty noises, or do you actually want them to engage with content and meaningful ideas for change?
Just a quick one. At my children's primary school, there is a large oak tree, and in high winds, some of the branches fell off, and the head teacher wanted to have it cut down because it was unsafe, so she thought, for the kids. But they had a tree officer come out and say it's not unsafe, so you don't need to chop it down, which was lucky because the kids staged a protest against her wanting to cut the tree down, and the tree is still there and it's beautiful. And and it provides very important shade to school with no grass at all, so I'm glad it's still there. And at the City Council, whilst we aren't, is the County Council that is the local education authority and is responsible for schools, we have some projects that work with kids. In our team, our flooding officer was working with a primary school in Oxford to help them reduce flooding incidents that they have at the school, and they have this absolutely wonderful, very brightly coloured system of pipes that come down from the roof to slow down runoff, but from the guttering, and it waters various plants and things, and it's absolutely wonderful, and they got grant funding to do it. But we're completely dependent on doing that kind of thing on grant funding. So one school in Oxford has a wonderful, wonderful project, and hopefully we can get more.
I just wanted to say that we do a fair bit of work with children and young people. In 2021, we ran a Doughnut Economics club in our local neighbourhood as well. I can share all the tools and things with you. I guess we take it through a few different strands. One is the incredibly positive strand, which is about them building, making, growing, creating, seeing what's possible in really hands-on ways, in intergenerational ways, and ways that gives them their own agency as children and young people, but really rebuilding the intergenerational connection, because I think there's something quite lost in that here. The second way is that we live in Ladywood in Birmingham, so there's no way children are going home and they don't understand global social. We have Sudanese children, Palestinian children, we have Palestinian team members, we have a demographic that is like, sorry, what? When you say, oh, by the way, let's use this insulation on this building, because you know what this insulation does? It uses this, this, and this, and this is where we get it from. And the kids are just like, what? And then the other thing is the question of what is enough. Once children see other ways, and children live this, because we're incredibly diverse city for historical reasons of how many people came here from the colonies to rebuild, as well as through displacement, as well as through migration, so many different routes. And so when you really bring that out, and you bring what's at home into the sphere, and you connect it to like materials or something you're making or something you're doing, or like the different things that your family are going through, actually at the intersection of it is that we see this question of what's enough for us. What are we willing to trade off to do this thing, as well as the huge creative capacity and the super positive things, super normal. It just isn't. So the thing I wanted to add was have a think about where you want your kids to spend more time, like and just make sure that they're in different settings, because actually there might be a perspective at which for one type of child who's grown up in what, this is no reflection on you, just generally I'm just saying, their sense of what's completely absurd and really negative might be completely different to their peers saying, yeah, by the way, my nan's from Bangladesh and this happened because of fast fashion, or this factory, or whatever. That's like a really normal conversation. So we have to do a lot of work of helping to surface the things that are normally talked about at home in immigrant communities, because that's what happened with us. Don't go out into the public sphere and tell anybody about these things. We're here to work hard, education, education, education. Whereas this generation are just like, oh yeah, but we know that us having this is at the conversation that you said, Oxford lifestyles are dependent on human rights abuses and many other things across the world. Reframe that into really normal everyday conversations, and they're actually everywhere. So I just wanted to bring some other reflections, because we are in right at the heart of a diverse urban inner city, and so our experience of some of these things are a little bit different as well. But where that is the case, we work really hard on those children being able to have positive building, creative, not further traumatizing them, and so on and so on. But I could talk about that to you more in like a one-to-one.
Yes, I think that's a perfect ending point, and I love that we ended on a more positive note as well. So thank you so much to all our speakers for their compelling insights this evening, and to all of you for your thoughtful questions and comments. yeah, I hope tonight has sparked a little bit of discussions around controversial issues, perhaps some provocations or constructive discomfort even. And I'll invite you to continue these conversations over drinks and nibbles in the back. And just as a quick reminder that this is the last seminar for this academic year, and we'll be back with the next public seminar in week 1 of Michaelmas term on the 15th of October, and we hope to see you all there. So for now, please join me in thanking once again our wonderful speakers, and thank you all for being here tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.